The pen froze between Mariah Ellis's fingers when the shadow fell across her notebook. Sirens wailed somewhere down Main Street, close enough to vibrate in her chest, but the sound that mattered was boots on concrete, slow, deliberate. She didn't look up right away. She finished the sentence she was writing. Unit arrived without body cam activated. "Hey, what are you writing?" The voice was casual, almost bored. That was what made it dangerous. Mariah raised her eyes. The officer stood too close, one hand resting on his belt, the other tapping against his radio. His badge read Officer Clayton. He was smiling, but his eyes weren't. "Notes," she said evenly. "Notes about what?" He leaned in, peering at the page like it belonged to him. "You media? You a protest organizer?" Behind him, a patrol car idled, lights washing the brick walls red and blue. A small crowd watched from across the street, people pretending not to watch. Phones half raised. No one speaking. Mariah felt the familiar calculation tighten in her stomach. "Breathe. Stay calm. Document everything. I'm allowed to take notes," she said. Clayton laughed softly. "Not like that you aren't." He reached out and snapped the notebook shut. The sound cracked through the air. "You people always think you're untouchable," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "You're not." Mariah's pulse hammered. Her fingers brushed a federal ID tucked deep inside her coat, unseen, unspoken. Clayton turned to his radio. "Dispatch, I got a suspicious individual interfering with police activity." The radio crackled back to life. And somewhere downtown, a supervisor's phone began to ring. The first thing Mariah Ellis noticed was a silence. Not the absence of sound. There was plenty of noise. Radios chirping. Tires hissing on asphalt. Someone arguing with an officer 2 storefronts down. But around her, a pocket of quiet opened, the kind that came when people decided not to get involved. She stood near the curb, notebook cradled in her left hand, pen moving in short, efficient strokes. She didn't record feelings. She recorded facts. 8:17 p.m. 2 patrol units. Officers exit vehicle before cameras visible. She kept writing. "I'm talking to you." Mariah finished the line, then looked up. "Yes, officer." He was white, mid-30s, jaw tight like he chewed on anger instead of food. His nameplate read Clayton. He scanned her face, her coat, the notebook, lingering just a beat too long. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "Standing on a public sidewalk," Mariah said. "Taking notes." Clayton snorted. "Notes about police activity." "Yes." "Who do you work for?" "I'm a private citizen." His eyes hardened. "That's not an answer." "It's a complete one." Behind him, his partner shifted uncomfortably. A man across the street lifted his phone higher, then lowered it again when Clayton glanced over. Clayton stepped closer. "Too close." "You got a permit to do that?" he asked. "To write." Mariah asked calmly. "Don't get smart." She met his gaze. "I'm not required to have a permit to observe or take notes." "That's so?" He reached out, flipped a page in her notebook without asking. "Looks like surveillance to me." "It's documentation." "Same difference." Mariah felt the familiar heat rise under her skin. She pushed it down. Training mattered. Control mattered. "Am I being detained?" she asked. Clayton smiled, slow and thin. "You are if you keep interfering." "I haven't interfered with anything." "Your presence is interfering." Across the street, a woman whispered, "This is messed up," but didn't move. Clayton tapped his radio. "Dispatch, run a check. I've got a suspicious individual refusing to identify." Mariah's pulse ticked faster. "I haven't refused. You haven't lawfully requested." "See," Clayton said to his partner. "Attitude." His partner avoided Mariah's eyes. Clayton snapped the notebook shut and held it. "What's your name?" "I don't consent to seizures of my property," Mariah said evenly. His jaw clenched. "You think you're special." "No," she said. "I think the law applies to both of us." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, uncertainty, quickly buried. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "You people come out here, writing things down like it means something. Mariah didn't blink. "It does," she said. Clayton straightened. "Turn around." "Am I under arrest?" "You're being detained." "For what?" "Interfering with police operations." The words landed heavy, rehearsed, institutional. As he guided her toward the cruiser, the crowd shifted, murmurs rising too late. A phone camera clicked on. Mariah caught her reflection in the dark window. Calm face, steady eyes, fear locked deep where it wouldn't show. This was why she was here, and Clayton had no idea who he'd just stopped. The back seat of the cruiser smelled like vinyl and old sweat. Mariah sat upright, hands folded in her lap, not cuffed, not free. The door shut with a hollow thud that felt louder than it should have. Through the tinted window, Main Street slid away, red and blue light smearing across storefront glass like bruises. Clayton drove. "So," he said lightly, eyes on the road, "you one of those cop watch people?" Mariah didn't answer. He chuckled. "Figures." At the station, the fluorescent lights were too bright, flattening everything into hard edges. A desk sergeant looked up as Clayton steered her forward. "What's this?" the sergeant asked. "Interference," Clayton said, refusing to identify, acting suspicious. The sergeant's gaze flicked to Mariah, quick, dismissive. "Name?" "I'll provide identification if I'm being charged," Mariah said calmly. Clayton rolled his eyes. "Here we go." The sergeant sighed, already tired. "Make this easy." She said. "I'm asserting my rights." That turned her a look, sharp, annoyed, like she'd broken an unspoken rule. They led her to a small interview room. No camera visible. The door closed. Silence pressed in. Clayton leaned against the table. "You know how this works," he said. "We ask questions. You answer." "I don't have to answer questions without counsel." "You don't look like you can afford counsel." The line landed exactly where it was meant to. Mariah inhaled slowly. "Am I under arrest?" "No," Clayton said. "Not yet." "Then I'd like to leave." He smiled. "Not happening." Minutes stretched. Then a lieutenant entered, Lieutenant Harris, judging by the bars. He nodded to Clayton, then studied Mariah like a problem he didn't want to solve. "What's the issue?" Harris asked. "She was documenting us," Clayton said. "Refused to identify. Claimed she knew the law." Harris raised an eyebrow. "Do you?" "Yes," Mariah said. Harris exhaled. "This department has procedures." "So does the Constitution." Clayton snorted. Harris shot him a warning look, then turned back to Mariah. "Why were you taking notes?" "Because I'm allowed to." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you're entitled to." "A beat." Harris leaned back, fingers steepled. "You understand how this looks." Mariah met his eyes. "I understand how it always looks." That gave him pause, just a flicker. After another round of circular questions, they released her without charges. No apology, no paperwork. Clayton tossed a notebook back across the table. "Careful where you point that pen," he said. "Might land you in real trouble." Outside, the night air felt heavier than before. Mariah walked 2 blocks before stopping. Her hands shook now. She let them for 3 seconds, then steadied herself. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. "It's Mariah," she said when the call connected. They escalated. "Officer Clayton, Precinct 3. A pause. Then, "Were you detained?" "Yes." "Body cams?" "Not activated." Another pause, longer this time. "Come in tomorrow morning," the voice said. "Bring everything." Mariah hung up and looked back toward the glowing windows of the station. Inside, Clayton laughed at something a colleague said, already certain the night was over. He was wrong. She opened her notebook again and kept writing. The next morning, Mariah sat in a small conference room of the Federal Oversight Office, a mug of coffee growing lukewarm beside her. The walls were lined with framed city maps and spreadsheets of prior complaints, hundreds of them. She flipped open her notebook, each page a thread in a larger story. "Hey," she said, pointing to a line she'd written the night before. Notice the sequence: no body cam, aggressive escalation, misidentification, assumption of guilt. Her colleague, Agent Ramirez, nodded, eyes scanning the page. Clayton has at least 5 similar incidents over the last 2 years. Citizens who recorded or questioned him, interrogated, sometimes unlawfully detained. Internal affairs never followed through. Mariah tapped the pen against her notebook. It's a pattern, not an isolated incident. Each case uses the same leverage, authority of perception. People see the uniform and assume compliance. Ramirez leaned back, rubbing his temple. And the witnesses? Intimidated. Cameras off. Community members silent or too afraid to speak. Which is why our documentation matters. Mariah traced a finger down a column of dates, incidents, and officer names. See? Every time he's challenged, he escalates verbally or physically. Every time, the department gives him space to continue. That's systemic. Her colleague looked up, voice low. How do you stay so calm? Mariah's lips pressed into a thin line. Because if I don't, I lose clarity. If I panic, my notes are useless. And if my notes are useless, the pattern continues unchecked. People like Clayton thrive on chaos and fear. The room was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional tap of a keyboard. Outside, the city carried on, oblivious to the subtle battles unfolding in quiet rooms. Ramirez tapped his pen. You're going back tonight? Yes, Mariah said. Observation, documentation, escalation if necessary, but controlled. We can't give him cause to justify misconduct. A moment of hesitation. Be careful. He's unpredictable. I know, she said. She closed the notebook with a soft snap. Her hand lingered over the spine, feeling the weight of every incident she had logged. Later that evening, she returned to the district where Clayton had confronted her. Streetlights flickered overhead, casting fractured shadows across the sidewalks. She positioned herself in a corner, notebook open, pen ready, eyes scanning patrol cars, officers, and the crowd alike. Minutes passed. Clayton appeared, the same smake, same posture, unknowing yet instantly wary. He glanced at her, recognition flickering like a shadow across his face, then forward again as if she were nothing. Mariah's hand moved over the page, writing every word, every glance, every pause. The conversation, the movement, the microaggressions, the unspoken rules of power she was trained to notice. From across the street, a teenager filmed with a phone, discreet. Another woman whispered, "That's a girl from last night," then hesitated. Silence. Fear. Mariah knew the stakes. One misstep could escalate, could be misinterpreted, could be used to discredit her. She counted breaths, measured her movements, maintained a calm exterior. Inside, adrenaline coiled, sharp and aware. She wrote the patterns, traced the escalation, noted the absence of intervention. Every word was a bulwark against erasure. Then Clayton made a move. He approached the corner where she stood, angle shifting to block the light. She kept her eyes forward, pen poised. He stopped, inches from her, and spoke, quiet, almost a murmur meant for her alone. "You're persistent. I'll give you that." Mariah's pulse spiked, but her voice remained calm, almost soft. Persistence is necessary when others won't act. Clayton's eyes narrowed. The corner of his mouth twitched into something between a grin and a snarl. He didn't retreat, didn't escalate yet, but the tension hummed, thick and electric. Mariah noted the shift. Body posture, tone, power, fear, control, all logged in careful, precise strokes. As she closed the notebook at the end of her shift, she felt the familiar weight of responsibility. The city around her moved, unaware of the silent documentation, unaware that her presence alone could one day unravel a system built to protect men like Clayton. And somewhere, in the quiet hum of her apartment, she allowed herself one thought. Tonight, he knows she's watching. And knowing can be a weapon. The department smelled like stale coffee and bureaucracy. Mariah had followed up with her federal team that morning, and the phone calls had already set a ripple of concern through precinct channels. Clayton, however, seemed unshakable, or at least he wore the facade expertly. Inside the briefing room, the hum of fluorescent lights matched the hum of whispered gossip. Clayton stood by the whiteboard, flipping through a roster as if nothing had happened. His partner leaned against the wall, avoiding eye contact with anyone but Clayton. "Morning," Clayton said casually. "What's a briefing?" The desk sergeant glanced at him. "You know why you're here." Clayton's eyes flicked toward the lieutenant. "I do." Harris's expression was flat. "We've received a complaint. Allegation of improper detention and harassment. Federal review involved." Clayton snorted. "Allegation, not fact." "That's right," Harris said, voice clipped. "We investigate. All involved officers will cooperate fully." Clayton's smirk tightened. "Of course. Always do." Mariah watched from across town, her team observing remotely, her phone buzzing with live updates. Clayton had no idea she was being monitored in real time. Every word, every movement, every defensive gesture was being logged. Back at the precinct, Clayton's confidence began to show cracks. A junior officer whispered in his ear, clearly uncomfortable. So, they might actually take this seriously. Clayton waved it off. "Don't worry. The system's got my back. They always do." Harris, seated at the edge of the table, didn't share that confidence. "Clayton, consider this a warning. Missteps will have consequences." Clayton's laugh was soft, derisive. "Consequences? You mean paperwork. Nothing more." Meanwhile, Mariah returned to her observation post that evening. Streetlights painted the sidewalk in fractured pools of gold. Clayton emerged from the precinct, clipboard in hand, the same practiced gait, the same aura of authority he had wielded the night before. He paused mid-step, noticing her perched on the corner. Recognition lit his face briefly, then he blinked it away as if dismissing her as irrelevant. Mariah's pen moved in quick, precise strokes, documenting the tension. She recorded his glances, his subtle adjustments, shifts in posture that revealed irritation he'd rather mask. Around them, the city carried on, oblivious to the subtle war waged in gestures and silences. Inside the precinct, whispers of federal oversight reached officers still filing reports, passing each other in hallways with hushed tones. Clayton's internal allies were cautious. Loyalty was tempered with fear. Union representatives had begun gathering, offering counsel and quietly advising patients, but even they couldn't erase a growing sense that the rules had changed. On the street, Mariah noticed something else, a small group of bystanders, previously hesitant, now hovering with phones half-raised. Observers, witnesses, not yet participants, but no longer entirely silent. She noted their hesitation, their fear, and their growing courage. Clayton finally turned back toward the station, his eyes narrowing. "See you tomorrow, I guess," he muttered under his breath, almost to himself. Mariah didn't respond. She let him walk, pen still poised, capturing every nuance. Later, in a quiet room at headquarters, Mariah reviewed her notes. She highlighted incidents where bystanders could have intervened but didn't, where officers showed reluctance to challenge Clayton directly, where internal loyalty had shielded misconduct. Each highlighted line became a link in a chain that, when connected, revealed systemic failure. Her colleague Ramirez leaned over her shoulder. "Is more dangerous now. He knows you're watching." Mariah's jaw tightened. "Exactly. And now, every move he makes is on record. Every misstep, every threat. He can't act the same way he did last night." "True," Ramirez said, "but he'll test boundaries." Mariah nodded. She knew this. Every escalation, every coded insult, every misuse of authority was predictable, but still exhausting. The psychological strain weighed on her. Still, she pushed forward. The night ended with Mariah closing her notebook. Outside, the city was alive, unaware. Inside, Clayton's shadow loomed, not yet broken, but no longer invisible. Internal loyalty protected him, yes, but observation had begun to erode that shield. Mariah allowed herself a small, quiet thought. Even the most confident men can falter when every move is recorded, every word dissected. And she would make sure he faltered. The public hearing room smelled of polished wood, disinfectant, and tension. Reporters jostled for position along the walls, cameras pointed, microphones poised. The room was half filled with community members, half with police officers in uniform, their expressions guarded, their postures defensive. Mariah entered quietly, notebook in hand. She was dressed simply, blazer, slacks, sensible shoes. No flash, no attention-seeking. But her presence was magnetic, not because of her looks, but because she was calm, composed, and unwavering in the eye of scrutiny. Clayton sat at the front, uniform neat, clipboard in hand. His jaw tightened when he saw her. Recognition flared in his eyes. For a moment, his bravado faltered. He had underestimated her before. The hearing began with opening remarks from the Oversight Committee. The chairwoman spoke with clipped authority, her eyes sweeping the room. We are here to examine allegations of misconduct within Precinct 3. We remind all participants that this is a formal proceeding. All testimony will be documented. Clayton's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'm ready, he said smoothly. Everything I've done is by the book. The first witnesses were civilians, some hesitant, some visibly anxious. Their voices shook as they recounted interactions with Clayton, officers quietly standing behind them. Mariah made careful notes, who looked afraid, who avoided eye contact, which officers shifted uneasily in their seats. Patterns emerged, small but consistent. When her turn came, Mariah rose. She approached the podium, calm but resolute. The room hushed, the air charged. Mariah Ellis, Federal Observer, she said, stating her title plainly, though leaving out operational specifics. She opened her notebook. I was present during multiple incidents involving Officer Clayton. I documented patterns of escalation, intimidation, and harassment. My observations were factual, time-stamped, and corroborated by witnesses and video evidence. Clayton's smirk faltered. Federal Observer? Really? That's convenient. I do not testify for convenience, Mariah said evenly. I testify for accuracy. And the accuracy shows a repeated pattern of abuse, disproportionate response to minor interactions, and assumptions of guilt based on race. A murmur ran through the room. Some officers shifted uncomfortably. Clayton cleared his throat. These are subjective observations, he said, voice smooth. She interprets my actions through a lens, an agenda. The truth is documented, Mariah interrupted. Her voice was calm, precise, measured. Video, timestamps, independent witnesses, and repeated patterns. The evidence does not lie. You escalated a routine observation into a detention. You ignored legal protocols. You intimidated bystanders. That is fact. Clayton leaned back, flustered but trying to regain control. Interpretation, he muttered under his breath, louder than intended. The committee chairwoman raised an eyebrow. Clarify. The actions, Clayton said, voice rising, were misinterpreted by Ms. Ellis. Mariah met his gaze. Her pen hovered above the notebook. If by misinterpreted you mean unlawful, unprovoked, and racially biased, then yes. Misinterpreted. A reporter scribbled furiously. Cameras zoomed in. The room felt smaller, tighter. Every word seemed amplified. A civilian witness, an elderly man from across the street, raised his hand. She's telling the truth, he said. I saw him stop her. I heard him. He didn't treat anyone else that way. Clayton stiffened. His defense crumbled under the weight of multiple corroborations. Officers in the back exchanged uneasy glances. Mariah continued. Patterns matter. One instance can be dismissed. Repeated incidents, corroborated by multiple sources, demonstrate systemic failure. And the institution failed to hold him accountable until this hearing. Her notebook captured each subtle reaction. The twitch of Clayton's hand, the tightening of his jaw, the faint nod from an officer trying not to show fear. Each detail added to the chain of evidence. By the end of her testimony, the room was silent except for the scratching of pens. Clayton's confidence had cracked, his composure slipping beneath layers of bureaucratic armor. The chairwoman leaned forward. Thank you, Ms. Ellis. Your testimony will be entered into the official record. We will review all evidence before issuing recommendations. As Mariah stepped down, she caught Clayton's eye one last time. He looked exposed, powerless under scrutiny, his usual smirk gone. Outside the building, the evening air carried the sounds of the city. Reporters clustered near the steps, their voices rising in a low murmur. Bystanders whispered, cameras recording, capturing the first moments of accountability in a public, undeniable way. Mariah exhaled slowly, closing her notebook. This was only the beginning, but it was a necessary one. The institution, once silent, had been forced to listen, and Clayton, who had thought himself untouchable, had glimpsed the power of observation and truth. The tension lingered like static in the air, unbroken. The story wasn't over. It was only unfolding. The city woke the next morning to headlines Mariah had long anticipated. Police misconduct under federal review. Officer allegedly harassed observer. Screens in coffee shops, subway stations, and living rooms flashed Clayton's uniformed face beside a blurred image of Mariah taking notes. Inside the precinct, the atmosphere was tense. Officers murmured in corners, eyes darting toward Clayton, who sat at his desk, silent, fingers drumming a staccato rhythm on the laminate surface. His clipboard lay discarded, forgotten. He hadn't slept much. He hadn't seen this coming. Mariah watched from a cafe across the street. She sipped lukewarm coffee, pen in hand, notebook open. Every movement, every glance, every word being documented. Her team had set up secure feeds. Even from a distance, they could track internal responses. Clayton finally emerged from the station. Reporters caught him instantly. Cameras flashed. Questions were shouted. Officer Clayton, response to allegations. He faltered, opening his mouth, then closing it again. The public glare was unrelenting. No casual smirk could shield him now. Later, leaked footage of the night's events, body cam from a neighboring unit, surveillance cameras, surfaced online. The video showed Clayton stepping into Mariah's personal space, snapping her notebook closed, radioing in her suspicious behavior. His words were clear. You people always think you're untouchable. Public reaction was swift. Community groups rallied. Social media exploded. Analysts dissected the patterns Mariah had documented. Former victims came forward. Names, dates, and incident compiled into a growing dossier, each account reinforcing the systemic nature of the misconduct. Inside the precinct, chaos simmered. Lieutenant Harris called emergency meetings. Union representatives attempted to stabilize officers' morale, but fear had already seeped in. Officers who had once shielded Clayton quietly began distancing themselves. Loyalty fractured under public scrutiny. Mariah's phone buzzed, a secure line. Ramirez's voice came through, calm but urgent. The media has amplified our findings. Several of the bystanders you documented have come forward. Clayton's past complaints are being revisited. The department is finally responding. Mariah nodded, even though Ramirez couldn't see her. She scribbled quick notes. Every new piece of information mattered. Patterns previously invisible were now undeniable, visible to the world. Clayton's private life began to unravel simultaneously. Former complaints resurfaced, racial profiling, intimidation, procedural violations. Colleagues hesitated to defend him. Internal emails leak in part, showing a culture of tolerance for his behavior. By the afternoon, federal oversight had sent a formal notice to the department. Clayton's actions were under investigation not just for that night, but for every documented incident over the past 2 years. The institution could no longer shield him. Mariah returned home that evening, exhausted but resolute. She sat by the window, notebook in hand, reviewing her entries. Every detail, every timestamp, every pattern now contributed to public awareness, to accountability. Outside, the city buzzed. News vans parked along streets. Protesters, journalists, and observers swirled together. The tension Clayton had once wielded so effortlessly had been turned back on him. Every move he had made in the shadows was now in the light. Her phone buzzed again, an encrypted message from a colleague. He knows we're watching. Be careful. Mariah allowed herself a single smile. That was the point. He had always underestimated observation. He had always assumed power lay in intimidation. Now, every action he took, every word he spoke, was scrutinized, documented, and visible. As night fell, Mariah prepared for the next steps: hearings, testimonies, continued observation. Justice was not instantaneous, but exposure had shifted the balance. Clayton's fortress of authority had cracks, and Mariah intended to map them all. She closed a notebook. Outside, lights from the city reflected on the glass, fragmented like the illusions of control Clayton had clung to. One day, he would have to face the full weight of every recorded misstep, and she would be there to see it. The early morning sun cast long shadows across Precinct 3 as Clayton arrived for his shift. The usual confidence in his stride was gone, replaced with a stiff, cautious tension. Officers whispered in corners, stealing glances at him, no longer eager to shield his reputation. Clayton's desk, once littered with folders and a coffee mug, was now empty except for a notice pinned to the wall. Federal investigation active. All conduct under review. He stared at it, jaw tight. The words felt heavier than any reprimand he had received before. The first domino fell that afternoon. The Internal Affairs Office, pressured by federal oversight and mounting public exposure, delivered formal charges: procedural violations, intimidation of a civilian observer, failure to follow protocol, and racial harassment. Clayton's smirk faltered as a sergeant read each count aloud. "You understand the gravity?" Harris asked. Clayton nodded, voice low, strained. "I understand." But understanding was different from accepting the consequences. Word spread through the precinct. Officers who had previously laughed at the idea of accountability now watched Clayton with caution. Rumors of suspension and potential legal action circulated. The institution, once his shield, now became a mirror reflecting his failures. Mariah arrived at the precinct later that week, not as a target, but as an observer once more. She carried her notebook, eyes scanning the room. Every subtle gesture, every nervous glance, every flinch of authority being challenged was logged. Clayton saw her and froze. Recognition flashed. He had underestimated her once, but now he knew the magnitude of her presence. "Ellis," he said, voice tight. I don't know why you're here." "I'm documenting," Mariah replied evenly. "Everything matters." Clayton turned away, rubbing his temples. For the first time, his posture betrayed vulnerability. The hearing for disciplinary action was procedural but public. Mariah testified again, calm and precise, presenting patterns, timelines, and corroborating evidence. Clayton attempted to defend himself, but the weight of evidence and exposure silenced him. Every lie he tried to weave was punctured by video, witnesses, and meticulously recorded notes. By the end of the day, the board issued its judgment: suspension pending further investigation, mandatory retraining, and federal oversight for the department. Clayton faced the possibility of criminal charges if additional misconduct was uncovered. Outside, reporters captured the moment. The cameras caught Clayton leaving the building, shoulders slumped, eyes avoiding every lens. The facade of invincibility he had wielded for years had crumbled. Mariah watched quietly from a distance. Victory was procedural, not personal. She knew the emotional toll of confronting abuse went both ways. Clayton's downfall was real, but so too was the strain she carried: the sleepless nights, the anxiety, the awareness of constant surveillance. Justice had been served, but at a cost. In the precinct, colleagues approached Clayton cautiously. Few offered support. The internal culture that had enabled his behavior was shifting under scrutiny. The cracks in the system widened, and everyone saw them, including him. Mariah closed a notebook that evening, reviewing every observation, every detail that had led to this outcome. The city moved around her, unaware of the quiet work that had dismantled one officer's misuse of authority. But she felt the subtle satisfaction that truth, once fully documented, could break even the most entrenched power structures. She allowed herself a single, quiet thought: accountability was possible, even within systems designed to protect the powerful. As the sun set, Mariah walked the street she had once observed from corners. Clayton's shadow no longer loomed over her, but she knew vigilance would always be necessary. Power sought to reclaim itself, and systemic injustice rarely slept. Tonight, though, she let herself exhale. The courtroom doors had closed, the cameras packed away, and the reporters dispersed. Mariah stood outside the Federal Oversight Office, notebook tucked under her arm, her shoulders heavy but steady. The city around her carried on, unaware that a small but significant fracture had appeared in the institution that had once seemed untouchable. Clayton's suspension and pending investigation had been publicized. He would face consequences for the first time in years. Yet, Mariah felt no triumph, only the quiet exhaustion of having carried the weight of observation, documentation, and confrontation for so long. Inside her apartment, she spread her notes across the table, reviewing every entry: the night on Main Street, the precinct detention, the public hearing, the media exposure. Each word was a testament to truth, but also a reminder of the personal cost. Her sleep had been fragmented, her meals skipped, her social life on hold. Her mind carried the echoes of fear, tension, and the constant calculation required to survive encounters with authority unprepared to respect her rights. A knock at the door startled her. It was Ramirez, holding a folder of new reports. "Status update," he said simply. Mariah nodded, gesturing for him to come in. Together, they went through the documents: complaints from previous victims of Clayton, federal findings, community witness statements. Patterns persisted. Systemic failure still evident, but now there was momentum toward reform. "It's slow," Ramirez said, "but this is how change happens. Small steps, persistent pressure." Mariah traced a finger along a line of notes, her pen poised. "And each step has a cost." "Yes," he agreed quietly. "Even victories leave scars." Later, she returned to her usual observation routes. Neighborhood streets, community events, precinct shifts. Everywhere she went, her notebook traveled with her. People began to recognize her, some nodding with gratitude, others still hesitant to trust. She recorded it all: moments of courage, fear, and the subtle shifts in institutional behavior. At night, alone in her apartment, Mariah sometimes felt the weight of it, the responsibility of being a witness, of holding systems accountable when so many others could not or would not. But she also felt resolve. The work was necessary, and though painful, it was meaningful. Weeks later, Clayton's public status remained diminished. He avoided precinct hallways, avoided reporters, avoided confrontation. But he was still part of a system resistant to complete reform. Mariah understood that victory was never absolute. Justice was continuum, not a single event. She opened her notebook one last time, writing not just observations but reflections. Patterns broken, accountability emerging, but vigilance remains. Power is patient, injustice persistent. The work continues. Closing the notebook, she looked out the window at the city lights, fractured across streets and buildings, much like the illusions of control Clayton had clung to. She allowed herself a moment to breathe, knowing that though the fight was far from over, this chapter had ended with truth prevailing, procedure upheld, and resilience tested but intact. Her phone buzzed, a message from Ramirez. "Observation continues tomorrow. Stay sharp." Mariah smiled faintly. The work would go on, as it always had. But tonight, for a brief moment, she let herself rest. And somewhere, in the quiet hum of the city, the ripple of accountability spread. Small, persistent, unstoppable. The pen was still in her hand. She was ready.